Was it like was it
Two.
wait, you know takes a little bit. Yeah, you know, we'll see.
Yeah.
And with highlights. Oh, I guess.
Well, good afternoon. Hello. Hi, thank you. Hi, I'm Cecilia Rouse, and I'm the president of the Brookings Institution. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to this very special event, which is the launch of Harnessing Technology for Inclusive Prosperity, Growth, Work, and Inequality in the Digital Era, a very timely and exemplary book. This book was edited by Brahima Coulibaly, and the Vice President and Director of the Global Economy and Development Program here at Brookings, as well as with Zia Qureshi, who is a Senior Fellow in the same program. Now, since this is a tech-centric event, I thought, why write my own speech when I could ask ChatGPT for help? So according to ChatGPT, this book is a testament to the idea that technology wielded with foresight and compassion has the unparalleled ability to uplift communities, empower individuals, and create a future where prosperity is truly inclusive. It is a call to action, a roadmap for policymakers, entrepreneurs, and global citizens alike to embrace and steer the technological wave towards a more equitable and prosperous world for us all. Okay, so don't get me wrong, it is a wonderful book. It's unclear, however, if this book has the unparalleled ability to empower individuals to create a truly inclusive and prosperous world for everyone. So here's what I have to say. A little less gushing, I'll admit, but perhaps a bit more human. In 2018, Brookings launched our Artificial Intelligence and Emerging Technology Initiative, an institutional commitment to generating leading research pertinent to maximizing the benefits of digital technologies while minimizing the cost to society. This book truly reaffirms that commitment. And in true Brookings style, this book bridges the gap between research and policy, providing viable, pragmatic, and actionable solutions. Okay, so enough from me and my assistant, ChatGPT. We have a very strong panel for your discussion today, spanning academia, the policymaking community, international organizations, and the tech industry. I thank our distinguished panelists for taking the time to join us, and now I will pass the mic to my colleague, Kul, to say a few more words. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia, for the welcoming remark, and thank you for contributing a very insightful foreword to the book. As I listen to what ChatGPT told you, I feel more like ChatGPT took it from you. So thank you all, and your foreword really set up nicely the rest of the chapters. So good afternoon to you all who are joining us both in person and online. many in different time zones. We are really delighted that you could join this conversation, and how to put technology to work for inclusive prosperity. I'd like to thank Zia Qureshi, my co-editor, and contributors, David Arthur, Kaushik Basu, Danu Roderick, Santiago Levy, Radhika Kapoor, Pipi Krishnapriya, Harun Borat, and Landry Signe, who's sitting here, Lucas Chancel, Carol Graham, and Jenica Broker. Cecilia has nicely set the context for the research presented in the book, so allow me to say a few words about the book specifically, its main messages, and then we'll turn to our panel for the discussion. So the technological transformation led by the digital technologies and now AI, most notably, is a big story of our time, full of exciting opportunities, but also risks. The book addresses the agenda of harnessing this technology to build a more prosperous and inclusive future. Policymakers, business leaders, workers, citizens more generally face many questions, including in what ways are the new technologies altering markets, business models, work, and in turn economic growth and income distribution? How are they affecting inequality within advanced economies and emerging and developing economies, and the prospect for economic convergence between them? What are the implications for public policy to capture the new opportunities and manage the new challenges? The book addresses all these questions, among others. So we know inequality has been rising in many economies, and the new technology have an important role, contributing role. There have been changing market dynamics in ways that increase inequality among firms and among workers. Firms at the technological frontier have pulled away from the rest, acquiring dominance in an increasingly concentrated market, and racking in supernormal profits. So increasing automation of low and mid-skilled jobs has shifted labor demand toward higher skills, hurting wages and jobs at the lower end of the skills premium. How will artificial intelligence, the next phase of digital revolution, affect the relative demand for skills and earnings inequality? There is still much uncertainty about how the scope of AI capabilities may evolve. As AI advances, displacement risk could affect some higher level skills jobs as well, in contrast to the previous waves of automation. However, the displacement risk at a higher skill level may apply more to the task level than to the entire job more broadly, or at occupation, as has been the case with the low and mid-level job skills. It is not only that inequality has been rising within economies, the expected productivity dividends from digital technologies has not fully materialized. So while these technologies do make productivity measurements more complex, data show that productivity growth has slowed rather than accelerated in many economies. Firms leading the charge on the new technologies, so-called the big tech, have captured the lion's share of the returns, while productivity growth has stagnated or slowed for smaller firms. Will artificial intelligence reverse the productivity slowdown? Possible, but again, that remains quite yet to be seen. In contrast to rising within country inequality between countries has fallen in recent decades. Faster growth in emerging economies have narrowed per capita income gaps relative to advanced economies. And technological change, however, poses new challenges for this global economic convergence. The manufacturing-led growth in emerging economies has been driven by their comparative advantage in low wage and labor-intensive products. This source of comparative advantage increasingly will erode with expanding automation of low-skilled tasks and jobs, disrupting traditional pathways to development. So what did these trends imply then for public policy? Large and persistent increases in inequality are not an inevitable consequence of technological progress. The history of past major technological breakthroughs tell us that public policy choices matter. greatly to whether technology serves the interests of a few or become the foundation for more spread prosperity. Unfortunately, public policy in general has been slow to rise to the new challenges. Policies have lagged shifting growth and distribution dynamics as technology has reshaped markets, business, and work. The digital economy must be broadened to disseminate new technologies to wider segments of firms and workers. This will both help advert rising inequality and capture the productivity dividend from digital transformations across wider swath of the economy. Combating inequality as technology drives change, therefore, is not only a distributional issue, it is also a growth issue. The policy agenda, as detailed in the book, is broad, spanning competition policy and regulatory frameworks, research and development policies, digital access, education and training, labor market policies, and social protection and taxation. The agenda goes well beyond redistribution, with discussion on combating inequality often narrowly focused on. The book emphasizes a range of redistribution policies to make markets and economic growth, as they are reshaped by technology, more inclusive. So adapting to new technologies is a big challenge for policymakers, but a really challenge is the shape of technological change itself, so that it supports broader economic and social goals rather than the interests of narrow groups of stakeholders. Can technology affect the pace of global economic convergence? Yes, it can, as it alters the patterns of international comparative advantage. But as technology disrupts traditional pathways to development, it offers new opportunities for developing economies that successfully adapt their growth models to the changing economic paradigm. These range from leapfrogging opportunities in development made possible by new technologies to greatly increase international connectivity to new areas of comparative advantage going beyond traditional manufacturing and encompassing services that technology is making increasingly tradable across borders. And these new pathways to development is a subject of a related research agenda that we have on a forthcoming book labeled The Promise of Industry Without Smokestack. So you have the preview of that here. So besides the major public policy challenges at the national level, there are important new challenges at the international level. Not only must past gains in establishing the rules-based multilateral system for trade and investment be shielded from today's increased protectionist pressure and resurgent nationalist industrial policies, but new rules and discipline must be devised for globalization that is going increasingly digital. In particular, international cooperation and governance of powerful emerging technologies, notably AI, will be important in realizing their benefits while managing the risks. So greater international cooperation seems daunting in the current geopolitical environment, but it is essential to harnessing technological progress for the benefit of all. So now let me now invite our esteemed panelists to come to the stage. We are really honored to have you all share your expert perspective with us. And my colleague Zia would be the moderator for today. So Zia, over to you. And dear panelists, please welcome to the podium.
Please.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Thanks. We are all set, and our microphones are working. So let's get started. Thank you to Cecilia and Kool for getting us off to an excellent start and setting the context for our discussion. And We couldn't have asked for a better panel for our discussion today. As Cecilia said, our panel spans academia, policymaking community, international organizations, and the tech industry, all important players in the quest to harness technology for inclusive prosperity. In the interest of time, I will be brief in introducing our panel. The event page on the Brookings website has links to their impressive full bios in alphabetical order and in the order of seating to my right. Justina Gallegos is Deputy Director in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. And among her other functions there, she leads the team on industrial innovation. Simon Johnson is Ronald A. Kurtz, Professor of Entrepreneurship and Professor of Global Economics and Management at the MIT Sloan School of Management, and also faculty co-director of the MIT Shaping the Future of Work initiative. Victoria Kwakwa is Vice President for Eastern and Southern Africa at the World Bank, my former institution. She previously served as Vice President for the World Bank's East Asia and Pacific region. So she has a very broad and rich perspective on emerging market and developing countries. And David Weller is Senior Director for Emerging Tech, Competitiveness, and Sustainability Policy at Google, where he has also been leading Google's global team on economic opportunity and society. I should also mention here that Google is a provider of generous support to Brookings, and I would also like to underscore Brookings' commitment to independent research. So we will proceed as follows. We will have a couple of rounds of questions with the panelists related to the themes and issues discussed in the report that we are launching today. And the questions I will ask also reflect some of the questions and comments we have received in advance from those registering for this event. And we will then open it up and invite questions from the floor. Those joining us online can submit live questions by email to events@brookings.edu or via X to Brookings Global using the hashtag Tech4Inclusive Growth, that is Tech4 Inclusive Growth. Lastly, if you would like to obtain a copy of the book, copies will be available for purchase at a desk just outside this auditorium, and I'm told at a 20% discount. So with that, let's start with our discussion. Simon, if I may start with you, with a big picture question. You recently co-authored with Daron Acemoglu an important book titled Power and Progress, Our 1,000-Year Struggle Over Technology and Prosperity. The book that we are launching today looks at the technology and inclusive prosperity question in today's setting, in the context of digital transformation and AI. From your perspective, spanning the history of major technological breakthroughs, how do you see the challenges of harnessing today's technologies for inclusive prosperity? This is admittedly a very broad question, but from your recent work, what are the key lessons that should inform public policy today?
Well, thanks. That's a great question. And I think if we'd been having this discussion, let's say in 1980, about 40, 45 years ago, The answer would have been, we've solved the problem. We know how to do this. This is what we've been doing, at least since World War II in the United States and in Europe and in other countries, harnessing technology. And unlike, let's say, the earliest phase of the Industrial Revolution, which was very difficult for many people, since 1850, let's say from 1850 to 1950, there was a lot of figuring out, a lot of building of institutions. There was the rise of trade unions. There was a rise of the regulatory power of government. And at that post-war period, the French call it the glorious 3 decades, 30 years, there was enormous success, I think, on exactly the issue that we're grappling with today. So I think, unfortunately, we have to ask, what has gone wrong? What did we lose since 1980? In what ways have we lost our ability to deliver on inclusive prosperity? Because technology clearly advances faster than ever. The productivity gains are disappointing, yes, but mostly I think what we worry about is the widening inequality between people of different education levels in the United States and the potential for that to impact other countries. And to sort of try to answer in a very focused way, Zia, I think that we need to find ways to provide incentives to the people who develop technology that pulls the technology in a way that's complementary to workers. Some people call it worker augmenting AI, as opposed to worker displacing AI. So there will be some automation. That is absolutely an unavoidable part of what this and many other information technologies involve, but you can also enhance the abilities of people, the productivity of people, the marginal productivity of people, and the ability to earn wages of people who don't have a lot of education. Now, if you can do that in the United States and do that in Europe, you can presumably do that around the world. It's not one size fits all, but that is what we did in the successful phase of, call it Western economic development. It's not, unfortunately, what we've done in recent decades. So getting back to that path is not going to be easy.
Well, thank you. We'll come back to some of the issues that you just touched on. Justyna, the U.S. is the economy at the technological frontier on digital innovations, on AI. It's a home of the big tech. It has also seen economic inequality rise in recent decades. And in fact, more than in most advanced economies, which have also seen inequality rise. So from your vantage point in the U.S. administration, how do you see the challenge of making technology promote more inclusive growth in the U.S. context? What are the key policy initiatives? And what more needs to be done?
Thanks, Zia. That's such a great question. And we can see from all of the work that the president has done to date that he cares deeply about channeling our nation's immense industrial capacity and innovation capacity towards really inclusive growth. And you've seen from the historic bills that have been passed across the bipartisan the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the CHIPS and Science Act, and the American Recovery Plan, for really historic pieces of legislation. You can see the shape of a modern American industrial strategy that echoes really industrial policy that has happened in the past, as was just discussed. And when you look at the shape of all of those bills together, you can see an Invest in America agenda that is really focused on bringing back strategic sectors to our country with the thought of advancing economic growth by harnessing those technologies, but really putting them in specific places and regions that are focused on inclusive economic growth. And so when you look across that set of bills, which we call the Invest in America strategy and agenda, you can see almost $900 billion in net new public sector investment across really critical sectors that we all care about. So think about things like clean energy, biomanufacturing, heavy industry, semiconductors, sectors that we know are critical to U.S. growth. And all of these are creating new jobs, particularly good paying jobs, union jobs, and jobs that really don't require a college degree. So we're seeing new entrants participating in the economy in regions that were historically left behind in really novel ways. In just the past 3 years, we've seen 15 million new jobs and the highest level of new business growth in recent years, over 17 million new business applications, which is incredible. So we're seeing all of these indicia of new economic growth happening in new places across our country. And I want to give 3 policy examples of where we're seeing this new industrial strategy take hold and how it's really taking shape for a new model for inclusive economic growth. First is in the CHIPS and Science Act. We created the first new directorate at the National Science Foundation in over 30 years called the Technology Innovation and Partnerships Directorate, or the TIP Directorate. And one of the most important programs within the TIP Directorate is called the NSF Engines Program, which announced a tranche of first-of-kind investments in regions across the country. There were 10 that self-identified emerging innovation ecosystems, many of which are AI-enabled, where communities identified their own sectors of strength and received specific investment that connects the dots across all of those regions to really bring communities together in a novel way that brings forward those technologies. Second, the Department of Energy is embarking on what has been described by many as the most significant clean energy and climate strategy in our nation's history, and many argue in the world, and is investing over $100 billion in clean energy demonstration and deployments across more than 60 new programs. DOE is leveraging AI across many of these solutions. When you think of really sticky clean energy challenges like deploying regulatory hurdles like permitting, how can AI be used to really fast track permitting so we can build more large clean energy projects and unlock clean growth in sectors that we care about, like the grid? And finally, the Department of Commerce's Economic Development Association administration has launched numerous programs, including the Build Back Better Regional Challenge and Tech Hubs, that is really designed to empower communities to self-identify their sectors of strength and then use those federal government resources to connect the dots across those communities. And so you see new growth happening across our country in a really novel way that I think reflects a lot of the historical growth that has happened to date, with the intention of that growth being inclusive. And I would really put an emphasis on the new places that growth is happening. We often think of technology being based particularly on the coast, but we're seeing new battery belts pop up in new regions, and all sorts of new sectors popping up across the country, which is really exciting.
Thank you. Now turning to emerging economies, Victoria. There's a risk that the new technologies may slow global economic convergence. That is the process of emerging economies narrowing income gaps relative to advanced economies. And this can happen as automation erodes the comparative advantage of emerging economies in their traditional, less skill-intensive manufactured exports. And this can create new challenges for these economies in terms of their future sources of growth and generation of higher productivity employment for their large and growing labor forces. At the same time, and we'll mention that, the new technologies are also creating new opportunities for these economies. And Africa, the region that you're currently engaged with at the World Bank, provides some promising examples. So how do you see these risks and opportunities in emerging economies?
Sure. Thank you, Zia, and thank you so much for the opportunity to participate on this panel. As you said in introducing me, I've worked on East Asia, the Pacific. I'm working on Eastern and Southern Africa now. I'll focus my comments on Africa. And I say this precisely because some of the experience on East Asia is quite different from Africa. So how do I see the risks and the opportunities? I think all the technologies that we're seeing emerging present some risks. You know, whether it's the inequality globally or within countries that you mentioned. We're seeing in Africa in particular that Africa is not converging really with the rest of the world and the trends, partly because of low adoption of technologies and low use of technologies. And then if you see within countries, we're also seeing inequality. Inequality is generally worsening in Africa. That's a trend. We're seeing inequality between the rural and the urban. We're seeing inequality across gender. And we're seeing inequalities also in terms of across firm size. Large formal firms, large-size formal firms, and micro size informal firms, and so you really see the technology or digital divide. It hasn't gotten, so the inequality is a reality in what's happening to Africa. On the question of jobs and automation in particular, for Africa, the industries that really where this is relevant in aren't quite established in Africa yet. So I don't really worry about technology displacing jobs in Africa yet. And so I think that if Africa can adopt more technology, overall we need more technology and capital deepening. So adoption of technologies that increases technology use per worker, I think will, on balance, be good, as opposed to not good. And then, as several, the two speakers said at the beginning, public policy has a role, and public policy can be implemented in a way that you mitigate some of the downside risks, and you make sure that technology increases human capability and is flourishing, as opposed to doing the negative things. So the risks are real. We're seeing some of it, but as you said, there are also opportunities and benefits, and we're seeing those as well. We're seeing some more in other places, some places than in others. A colleague just mentioned green energy technologies, and we're seeing this make a difference in certain parts of Africa, particularly in rural areas. Distributed renewable energies bringing access to electricity for the first time to some of the most disadvantaged people, and helping them also get access to services. And then we're seeing this a lot in some of what is happening in education in particular. We take the example of Kenya, where the government has used a lot of digital access to digital services, digital technology to provide access to education, particularly in some of the rural parts in northern Kenya, where people are the poorest. Some of what is done on radio, Rwanda has gone into the use of digital textbooks, providing access to more people. We saw what happened under COVID, where children were able to learn digitally. But there was an upside and a downside, because those kids that lived in remote areas whose parents couldn't pay and didn't have access, lost a lot and dropped out, in large numbers. And they haven't all come back yet. So you're seeing good things happening, but you continue to see the unequalizing impacts this is happening. And then we see also in health, where the use of technology, whether it's telemedicine, whether it's using AI to complement health sector workers, particularly in areas such as imaging and so on, is helping. Because the WHO standard is to have 45 healthcare workers per 10,000 population. That most countries can't afford in Africa. So bringing some of these technologies in, including AI and so on, is making a difference to some extent. We also see some of that in agriculture, where artificial intelligence is helping to monitor soil health, and also to make some suggestions about pest management and control. So several examples of things happening that will help or is helping to raise productivity, creating growth spurts, and also providing services to particularly people who are in rural areas who are underserved. So all of this is good. I think the challenge that we have is that a lot of this is really still at small scale. So you need to go to scale, and you also really need to address some of the issues of affordability, of technologies. You have to address some of the issues of literacy, to use technology, and so on. So I think it's very much early days in Africa, and the promise is great, but we need to continue to work at it to really see this realized. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. So David, now we turn to a perspective from the tech industry that is the source of the technologies whose implications we are discussing. So how do you see this debate about technology and inclusion and concerns about small businesses and workers, especially given your work at Google on economic opportunity initiatives? How do you see the role of tech industry in this context?
Well, thanks so much, Zia, for having me. And this is such a great conversation because I feel like the past year we've had two predominant conversations. One conversation has been the wow conversation. Oh my goodness, AI wrote President Rouse's speech. And yeah, it was, as she said, it wasn't entirely human, but it was pretty good. And many amazing things that we are all seeing. And to some degree, what happened a year and a half ago when ChatGPT 3.5 was first released to the world was sort of people seeing under the hood a lot of AI developments that were happening and could touch it. And that was sort of a wow moment. The second conversation we've been having is sort of the oh wow conversation, which is this kind of seems a little bit scary too, right? Mm-hmm. Like the killer robots, the AI out of control, loss of autonomy, those kinds of issues. And that really has dominated a lot of the conversation. But I think there's a key conversation that we need to be having more of, which is exactly what your book and Brookings is focused on, which is ultimately, right, technology is a tool. The question is, how do we harness this new wow technology to actually produce inclusive prosperity and make people's lives better, both across the United States and across the world? And I think too often we have had those conversations in different silos or not had them at all. And, frankly, as someone from the tech industry, I will say, like in sort of the first generation of this, there was a lot of techno-utopianism in Silicon Valley. We're going to release these awesome, amazing products. We're going to let it free, and great magical things are going to happen. And some very good things have happened. But we also have learned a lot over the past 20 years that things don't happen automatically. And so I think the fundamental question around your book and this convening is, what is to be done to ensure that we translate, that we both harness and direct technology development in a way and have complementary policies so that it translates into true, broad, inclusive growth. And there's a lot of work to be done. Mm-hmm. And I think what's great about this panel and your book, and we're really honored that you included a company as part of this conversation, is no one sector is going to resolve any of these issues alone. Sitting in government, sitting in a university, sitting in an international organization, sitting in the tech industry, sitting in some other sector, right? Like we are all going to have different perspectives on that, and the solutions to these problems are going to require deep collaboration. And so I think that's super important. Maybe I'll just sort of spend a couple minutes offering quickly sort of how I and we have been thinking about what are some of the key ingredients to translating what I think most agree is a new general purpose technology, a transformative technology into broad and inclusive prosperity for people. The first is inclusive infrastructure. I think, again, we've seen a lot of public discussion about, and it's well understood, the importance of compute and hardware and data centers, the importance of data sets, the importance of algorithms for AI. How do we ensure that we are, in fact, building those in the right way and that they're broadly available? And so, for instance, R&D, Google and many other companies spending a huge amount, $40+ billion a year on R&D. What's the open element to that? What's the open science element to that to ensure that it's not just one company, one player, but we're doing this in a way that is broadly leading to increased knowledge? On the infrastructure side, connectivity, right? How do we ensure that, to your points, Victoria, that the underlying digital divide that we already have with, depending on how you count, a third or a quarter of the world without true broadband access and affordable internet connectivity, how do we not replicate that in the AI world and have an AI divide? And we and others are spending a lot of effort building subsea cables, for instance, to make internet more accessible and affordable in Africa and other places. But what are kind of cross-sectoral approaches on that? And then, we have universities, small businesses, others who need to be part of the R&D ecosystem, but often because of either the unavailability of specialized data sets or the expense of compute, don't have access. So we have efforts like the NARE, the National AI Research Resource, that is being stood up in the United States to help make those kind of resources available to sort of democratize research. We talk about the need for something like a GRAIR, like a global resource. So this is all sort of as part of the innovation infrastructure ecosystem. The second is workforce. And ensuring that we have an AI-ready workforce. This is a super complicated area, and particularly with some of the other folks on the panel, I'm reluctant to talk too much about this because they're deep experts on workforce issues. But this is a very complicated area, and I'll just mention a couple of ways that we have been thinking about it, I think both at Google, but others in the tech sector. One is ensuring that there is broad familiarity with AI. I think, in the same way that numeracy or reading literacy is expected for out of our schools, we're going to need the same thing for AI. If we're going to be in a sort of AI-centered economy in the future, or at least AI-powered economy, you need that broad availability. Secondly is sort of the skills to jobs pipeline. We have a challenge in the United States, right, which is it's both a challenge and an attribute, which is we have a very mobile workforce where labor moves quickly, and that can allow for a very resilient and flexible economy. But it also means that firms sometimes have less incentives to invest in long-term training. How do we address that? And one way to do that is to identify in-need skills, provide training of those skills and credentialing so that others can recognize it, and then a pipeline to jobs. And rather than needing a university degree from a fancy university to get a job at X or Y, Z, if you need to be an IT support person or a cybersecurity professional, those are concrete skills which we can do trainings around. We've developed something called Google Career Certificates, which is aimed at that, which is sort of developing these certificates, and then an employer consortium who will look at those with the certificates. And then finally is sort of workforce-based programs like apprenticeship programs. And then the third broad area really goes to broad and inclusive adoption. And I think a number of folks have referred to this. If this amazing tech sits within the tech sector, and the 5% of American workers who are part of digital services and technology, we will have deeply failed. And there was some reference before to superstar firms and different productivity, that's exactly what we're going to do with AI, if it's only tech that's adopting this, and financial services, which, by the way, also tends to be an area that adopts new tech quickly. But if we're not doing it across manufacturing, if we're not doing it across agriculture, different service sectors, we're going to see that kind of inequality and lose out on the tremendous benefits. And maybe just I know I'm short on time. Just the very last point I would make here is really the importance of sort of place-based approaches. And I just wanted to mention, Mark Morrow here in the Metro program has done really good work in that whole program and looking at what role kind of place-based kind of cross-sectoral initiatives can play, so that this is not just a coastal story, and of course there's an international version of that as well.
Thank you very much. Simon, let's come back to you. Looking ahead, there are, as you know, there are differing views currently on how AI, which is the next phase of the digital revolution, how that may affect inequality between workers. So there's one view which looks at AI as skill bias, technological change on steroids, which will continue or even intensify recent trends of wage and job polarization, disadvantaging less skilled workers and exacerbating inequality. Right, so that's one view. There's another view that sees AI as a potentially equalizing force, which could extend expertise to and augment and empower a larger set of workers. And this divergence of view is in part understandable because we do not yet have the full measure of how AI capabilities may evolve and their impacts, and much, of course, would also depend on how public policies respond. But what's your take on this debate looking ahead?
Well, I think we face a really big choice, Zia, a fork in the road, if you like. On the one hand, and there's some strong positives, so what Justina and her colleagues have been working on, I think, is very, very sensible. Create new sectors, get science to work, turn science into commercial products, spread that around the country, so no more of the East Coast, West Coast predominance, or reduce that predominance, although those places can remain strong. And what David and his colleagues work on is also completely understandable and justifiable, which is you want the technology to be available to more people, you want more people to adopt it, and so on. But the problem is, and this is what the choice is, and it's a difficult choice, okay? And I'm not saying anyone is particularly blocking it or refusing to do the sensible things here, but the choice is, although the problem is that any technology like this naturally automates to some extent. So you're replacing people doing tasks, as Kuhl said, with machines doing tasks. And one CEO described it to me, the people he felt most in line to be replaced, this is his term, not my term, he called them cut and paste jobs. So jobs that have some routine element, but they're not entirely routine, because otherwise they would already have been automated by what we've seen in the past few decades. Now, if you look at the LinkedIn data, for example, those people are generally between sort of 20th and 30th percentile of the earned income distribution. So these are white-collar jobs. They are maybe not the best jobs, you can make up your own mind on that, but a lot of times they're entry-level jobs, they're a step up the ladder, and some people they are career jobs as well. Now, when those jobs go away, and I think they will go away, what do those people do? If they're able to get trained in something else, if they're able to enhance their skills, if they're able to pivot, that's good, and they may actually we'd hope they earn more money in that case. But unfortunately, what's happened in the past 4 decades with the skill-biased technological change that you mentioned, and that David Autor's chapter in your book is a brilliant exposition of, David, one of my colleagues at MIT. What happened previously in our immediate prior history is that people who had those middle-class, middle-income, middle-education jobs lost them due to technology and also globalization, and got pushed down to the lower end of the labor market that's intensely competitive, where you don't earn a premium wage. So the key question is what's going to happen to those people who are in the line of fire? People at the top end, and I think many of the people in this room probably would fall into that category, will generally do fine. People on the lower end, having mostly manual jobs, are not going to be that much affected until AI comes to those jobs into manufacturing. But that's a ways down the road, as we've been discussing. What's going to happen to those people in the middle, and to what extent can we develop technology that enhances their skills, that accelerates the change for them towards better jobs and a better life? That's a difficult question, and that's not a question that is that has yet been completely cracked by people in the policy space, although Justina and plenty of people on the Hill are thinking about this, or people in the private sector, although David and his colleagues and other people, and including their competitors, are also thinking about this. That is the choice that we now face as a society, and I think as a world.
And just a quick follow-up on that. You partly touched on that, and also linked to your recent book, Spanning History. Besides this concern about increasing inequality, there is also this concern that if artificial intelligence progresses toward artificial general intelligence, AGI, that could eliminate many jobs across the skill spectrum. But we also know from history that in the previous episodes of major technological breakthroughs, new tasks and jobs emerged to replace those that were displaced. But there are some who are concerned and asking this question, that with AGI, could this time be different? So,
yeah, look, it's a fantastic question, and we could spend days and days discussing it. We don't know yet because we're a long way from AGI. But the key point on the history, Zia, we do know, which is sometimes big technological breakthroughs have generated lots of new tasks and an increased demand for labor and rising wages, and sometimes they haven't. Sometimes big technological breakthroughs generate a lot of wealth for a few people, and they undermine the existing jobs, including the well-paying jobs for others. Now, people may still have to survive, but getting pushed down to a subsistence level of wage is not anybody's idea of a fantastic technological transformation, is it? So I think the AGI is an important issue, and I'm happy to join debates on that. I think what we're facing right now is something much more immediate in our faces and unavoidable, which is what happens to those jobs in the middle. Are we going to further hollow out the American economy and American opportunities and become more polarized from an economic point of view, which feeds into other forms of polarization? I think there's lots of evidence on that. And what happens in other industrialized countries, and then what happens in the developing and emerging world? Can they find their own path, as Victoria was saying, or will they get pulled into this? Particularly because I think, well, my colleagues who work on bringing AI to manufacturing have a lot of work to do, but they're very busy, and they're trying to bring it to manufacturing, and that could also have an impact, as you said at the beginning, as Cool said, about on the labor-intensive sectors that some countries rely on or most countries have relied on at some point for their economic development.
Yeah. So, Justina, moving from labor markets to product markets, from workers to firms, there are also challenges for public policy to ensure that markets remain competitive and inclusive as they're reshaped by technology, to check the rise of monopolistic structures, keep the playing field level for firms, and also to guard against risks of misuse of data and technology. So there are new challenges for public policy relating to competition policy and regulatory frameworks. Now, in Europe, important new regulatory frameworks have been put in place. The General Data Protection Regulation, the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, and most recently, the AI Act. In the US, there has been action as well. For instance, the president's executive order on AI, the recent tightening of antitrust enforcement, and there has been also some buildup of reform momentum in Congress. But so far, major legislative success, as in Europe, here has been elusive. So how do you see this policy agenda, the progress on this? in the US context, and also related to that, the need for international coordination on this agenda?
Yeah, thank you, Zia. Those are great questions. And I want to talk about sort of the shape of the change that we are trying to drive in the US economy. And I think a really central question that everyone should ask is, what change and specific shape of the economy do you want your government creating, and what should that economy look like for you? And that was one of the central questions that we set out to answer right at the beginning of the administration. And you saw one of the first actions that the president took was set up a really first-of-kind novel competition council with a focus on looking at the shape of the U.S. economy and how it can better work, not only for firms to enhance competition, but to really think about how competition can put workers first and how workers can be central to economic growth and really prioritized in competition. And so that competition council included over a dozen agencies and over 70 different actions to date to think about how competition policy across all sorts of different policy sectors, from financial regulatory spaces to technology spaces to broader industrial strategy, are really putting workers first. When you think about a few examples, as you mentioned, for example, the FTC most recently put in a non-compete ban that, if finalized in its current form, could raise wages by nearly $300 billion annually for over 30 million workers. So there are a bunch of examples of how we are trying to prioritize really putting workers first in all of our policies. And you see that reflected also in the legislation that has already been passed in Bill CHIPS and IRA, where when we are making these regional investments in specific sectors, we are incentivizing employee-centric opportunities. So, for example, in the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the largest climate action in history, you see a ton of incentives for companies across the clean energy spectrum. There's about 38 different sectors that are invoked in the clean energy transition. And there are a bunch of incentives to produce and manufacture new innovative technologies, particularly here in the US. And when you think about the government incentivizing production in sectors that we really care about, that of course is great. We want to be spurring new economic growth, but we don't want that economic growth to just all go to firms and be really firm-centric. We want that to be impacting communities across the country, and we also want that specifically to be incentivizing good jobs for everyday people. And so when you look at the incentives and what's in those incentives for production of new manufacturing, there are specific rules tied to a lot of those production incentives for companies for the shape of the jobs that they will create. And so you see a lot of union activity that's being spurred, a really novel union activity across the country. So these are good paying jobs, often jobs that don't require a college degree. They're being triggered by public investment that's then being followed on by private sector investment. So there's really strategic intention in a lot of that federal government investment. And then when we think about AI, I also want us to think about sort of the shape of the policy that we are trying to trigger. And we've been really intentional in our approach, noting we hope for legislation, but yet to come. One of the first actions that we took around AI a few years ago, before this sort of took over every conversation that we were thinking about, was create a first-of-kind blueprint for the AI Bill of Rights, which, if you read it, has a number of principles that lays out really how workers and everyday folks should be centered as we think about the technology transition that will come and that we knew was about to come through AI. And so first, laying out those principles, and then second, you see, as mentioned, the AI executive order last fall, which when you look across the I think it's over 150 executive actions, at least, that have been put out by our administration. This executive order is the largest executive order to date. There are hundreds of new activities across I think it's nearly every agency in government that have been spurred. And so when we think about all of those activities, the intent is both to harness the potential of AI in driving economic growth, but specifically to also make sure that we are addressing the potential challenges. Specifically, those challenges might be posed for communities and specifically for workers. And so you'll see many actions across the federal government focused on online safety, on privacy, and also on addressing alignment and shared practices with international partners. And so how we are trying to use that executive order and all of those policy actions to spur further aligned activities, both at the federal level, hopefully at the congressional level, but that actually trickles down into specific both job opportunities that enhance the quality of those jobs for everyday workers across the country, but that also enhance protections and safety.
Thank you, Justina. David, if I may turn to you, the tech industry's response to the competition policy and regulatory agenda relating to digital markets and now AI has been a mix of defensiveness, resistance, but also support. For instance, some tech industry leaders have expressed support for AI guardrails. I was just earlier mentioning to Simon that OpenAI CEO Sam Altman has expressed support for a new international agency to regulate AI, citing concerns about risks of global risks from misuse of advanced AI system. So from the perspective of the tech industry, how do you see this agenda, the need to strike the right balance between promoting innovation and managing innovation responsibly and inclusively? Right balance so as we avoid both excessive regulation and insufficient regulation.
And at the right time, right? These are all the hard questions. Well, thanks, Zia, and I will try not to answer the question defensively. I will say also I don't speak for the tech industry. I'll give you my views. Look, our CEO said a few years ago that his line was, AI is too important not to regulate and too important not to regulate well. This is obviously a deep, important, transformative technology, and regulation needs to play a role. And as you say, what's the line between too little and too much regulation? Maybe I'll just talk about 3 or 4 principles that we've put forward in how to think about these questions. I think the first is really taking a very risk-based approach to AI regulation. Part of the problem of, honestly, the whole AI conversation is, what is AI, right? It is a broad field of science and technology that does everything from, keep spam out of your phone and help you get to a place more efficiently and help you do customer service more seamlessly, to potentially something that your bank is using to make a loan decision, or that a pharmaceutical company is using to discover a new drug, right? So it's many, many different things. And like many areas of technology, we should be regulating technology and where it meets the world. We should not be trying to regulate the underlying science and technology. So another way to think about it is sort of what are the outputs? And again, in some of my examples, the first couple of examples, sure, you need underlying rules around privacy and competition enforcement in how a company is deploying AI for your map directions, but it's probably quite different than if it's used by a regulated sector for decisions about money or your life. So that risk-based approach is focused on uses. The couple of other quick things I'll say is and it's sort of a corollary to this, which empower existing regulators. Sometimes we have the notion that all this AI stuff is brand new. if we're using AI in employment decisions, guess what? We have the EEOC. If an employer is discriminating using AI systems, they should be held accountable there. Similarly with health and safety issues. Regulators need to be empowered to do that. They need the right knowledge about AI, they need the right powers, and there may be gaps that need to be filled. But let's look first to them before sort of coming up with the new agency of AI. And then maybe just the final point I'll make is the importance of international alignment. Every country in the world is thinking about these same issues. And if we take 100 different approaches to the same questions, boy, are we not going to actually ensure that AI is deployed in a way that meets our common goals, and we're just going to end up in major policy cacophony.
Thanks. Victoria, in terms of this international cooperation agenda that we touched on a little bit just now, particularly in relation to one area of collaboration, which is the regulation of the new technologies. So that is one area. Another is to assist countries in adapting to the new technologies and to the shifting economic paradigm, right? So what policy priorities do you see, cross-cutting policy priorities for developing economies in recalibrating their growth and development strategies, recognizing that it's a diverse group, developing economies. And in that context, how is the World Bank supporting its member developing countries?
Sure. Thank you. Look, I think that for countries in Africa, one of the main policy priorities or priority areas of action is really opening up digital markets, in structures, because a lot of them have come from, monopoly settings where you have one public parastatal, just doing everything. And that has not made room for competition. You've had some unused government infrastructure capacity. You also haven't had the private sector be able to come in and support the provision of infrastructure, which they can do. And so I think a first priority is really opening up these markets, allowing other players, private players to come in, compete, drive prices down, and also bring resources into the provision of infrastructure, and therefore promote both access and affordability of services. And so we're supporting that. We're doing some of that work in Senegal through what we call policy-based support or policy-based loans, which is really around changing policies and so on. I think the other thing is really, again, in terms of affordability and equity considerations, making sure that the poorest of the poor are served. So instances where public sector has to provide subsidies to the private sector to service some of the most remote areas and in all the facets. And so policies around that, being very deliberate to make sure that the most vulnerable are not left out. Of course, the pricing of devices, a lot of people don't use some of these technologies just because devices are too expensive. It will take so much of their monthly income. And so even how do you work with the private sector? It doesn't all have to be by the public sector to make sure that there's affordability in access to devices. I think these are very important issues. Then, of course, with use, it's also skills, and digital literacy. Again, people don't use it because they're not literate enough. They don't know how to use it. Some of it is very basic training and skilling up. But really needs to be done. So this is also an area that we're working in. We're working with the private sector to provide basic literacy, particularly for the youth and for women, who tend to get left out. We are doing some of that in Malawi, we're doing that in Rwanda and several other countries. In terms of, and then issues around the data privacy, cybersecurity is also important, because right at the beginning you want to build trust and you want to let people feel that, you know, they're being protected and their information is being protected. And then in terms of collaboration, we're also working with the WTO to help countries really put in place the regulatory frameworks to enable digital trade, you know, and e-commerce, which, you know, is picking up in quite a few African countries. But what's the regulatory framework that would enhance it, that will allow more people to come into that space and, you know, be able to earn a living? We've just announced a program in Eastern and Southern Africa to work between now and 2030 to provide, to double access in the region, to provide, to increase the number of people who use digital services or digitally enabled services by over 100 million, 134 million to be precise, and also to support governments and work with them to increase digital IDs and so on, which can be the basis of service provision in several areas. So we've really stepped up our work in this area. It's a huge agenda for us. We, as I said, see the promise, but lots on the table still to be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting. So let's now open it up for questions from the floor. If you please raise your hand if you would like to ask a question, and a handheld microphone will be brought to you. And when asking your question, please identify yourself and your affiliation. And if you wish to address your question to a particular panelist, please indicate so. And lastly, please keep your questions short so we can accommodate as many as we can. So who is the first? The lady there, yes, and then the gentleman here, and so we'll take 2-3 questions and then we'll get back to the panelists. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Pauline Bell. I'm with U.S. Department of Treasury. My question, well, because of the very high cost that we associate with AI development or any other advanced technology, it naturally leads to monopolies. But then there's a pushback from various governments in the US and in Europe as to how we're supposed to handle that. So any thoughts on that? How can we reach that balance between maintaining a few monopolies, because, well, that's the natural way to do this, but also encouraging more competition? And then just a very quick question about what do you think about the fact that Europe does not have their own large company like Google or Microsoft? I mean, they're lacking in that area. Does it mean like the world is pretty much going to be divided between the haves and have-nots as far as technology is concerned? Thank you.
Let's take 2 more questions and then.
Hello, how are you? My name is Rajai. I'm with the IMF Youth Fellowship, so I'm here in DC. I came from Jordan. And so throughout the conversation, one thing that we've been working on in Jordan and specifically in the wider MENA region is youth unemployment and unemployment in general. We have, like in Jordan specifically, we have 47% unemployment rate among youth. We're talking 18 to 35 years old. And the general MENA economy, and I'm sure this is that's a reflection on the wider global South, is that it's highly SME based and micro businesses based. So my question is, what would you advise policymakers in those regions to help deploy technology to kind of combat unemployment? And also, do we need more disruptive tech companies in those areas? And do we need them more generally now in this era? We're having less of them, especially with the tech layoffs. Are those a solution for such economies and to enhance the global economy in general?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for sharing your thought today. It was very engaging and insightful. And I'm Ian. I'm a master's candidate at Harvard School of Public Health. I want to ask you about the dual effect of technology. Technology has the potential to drive economic growth, prosperity, and productivity. And at the same time, many cases have shown that it can exacerbate inequality. For example, a quarter of US population in rural areas lacks access to the internet. And another example is that some countries like Bahamas and Nigeria implemented central bank digital currency. It has many advantages, but at the same time, there are many issues from the perspective of financial inclusion due to the lack of digital literacy, especially for those who live in rural areas. So I want to ask to Dr. David, how do you propose to balance this dual effect? Thank you.
Okay, so we'll come back to a couple more questions. I saw a few additional hands, but let's get back to our panel. So who would want to take one of those questions? And yeah, okay, please.
I'm happy to respond.
Then we will
on the first one. So look, I think with respect to AI, this is a very new and emerging space, in particular generative AI. So I think the market dynamics are very much in flux. But I would just note a couple of things, and maybe to challenge a little bit the premise of the question, that the costs are so high that it will be sort of a natural monopoly. So, right, there are different key ingredients, as you know, right, in terms of AI development. When you think about the data side, ChatGPT, many of these other models have largely been trained on the web crawl, on the open web, right? So that is available to anyone. A big bottleneck area has been compute and the cost of compute. But the cost of compute, both because of efficiency of models and because hardware is getting cheaper, has dropped and is dropping very, very quickly. So it's been going down. The cost of training models has been going down something like 70% a year over the past 5 years. And I think most people expect it to continue. It doesn't mean that these things aren't expensive. They are. The third thing I would say is just sort of looking at the market, right? I mean, not until 2 years ago, no one heard of OpenAI. Now, they did later get a big investment from Microsoft, but it was a company that was not part of the ecosystem. There's tremendous VC activity. In fact, many people think it's probably overheated. But we just see a lot of startups in this space at all layers of the stack. Something like 150 AI chatbots were introduced just in the first half of last year, for instance. In terms of model availability, we have, Google, OpenAI, others, but we have many others as well. Cohere, Mistral, Character AI, Alpha, many other companies, which, again, they've been able to raise funding in order to train. And then the last thing I would say is sort of the open source piece. There are a lot of open models now, again, whether it be Llama or Vicuna or Google's own Gemma, G42, that others are building on top of. And it's much, much cheaper than to train and fine tune on top of that. And so I think that's part of the reason it's sort of honestly been such a frothy market. So I think time will tell. It's right for competition authorities to pay attention and to make sure there's not anti-competitive conduct going on, for sure. But I think it's way too early to say that the economics of this are going to lead to 2 big players or 3 big players in AI at any level of the stack.
Simon?
So just as a counterpoint to that, I think monopolies are always very dangerous and damaging to the public interest, and including if you've got a couple of companies dominating a space, which is where we are now. But David's right, it may change. I think we should also have to worry about algorithmic collusion. Not a term I've invented, but you can go look it up and add something to that Wikipedia page if you want. That's going to be a very important issue. Also, but I think more than just the market structure conventionally defined, that on the second and third questions, I think what you're articulating quite correctly and quite effectively, is there's a lot of demand in the world for better solutions to youth unemployment problems, to public health problems and access problems. So we know there are analytical problems. We know there are complex, potentially problems that can be addressed with better computation and with better algorithms. But the focus of the companies that are driving this space, including all the competitors David talked about, is not, I would humbly suggest, youth unemployment in Jordan or public health problems in rural America. It's not. They're after digital ad dollars for Facebook and other types of opportunities, because that's where the money is, right? So the way you count, and I can say this because I used to work at the IMF, go talk to the World Bank. That's what you got to do. Because what you need to do is organize purchasing arrangements where maybe Jordan isn't big enough, but all other countries that have similar issues can get together and say, look, here's a problem facing 1 billion people. If you build it, we will buy it. And we know, here are the specifications, who's going to buy that for us? Same thing with the public health problems. And the World Bank leads on vaccine development, for example, and they've done this for many other things. Tsetse fly eradication, for example. So if you articulate the market demand and put money behind it, people will build to it. But if you just complain about it in conferences like this, nothing's going to happen.
Any other quick replies, or we can take more questions?
I like your suggestion. In response to the youth unemployment. And this is a major issue in Africa. You have a huge youth bulge, no jobs. So really coming together to see what might be the right way to really get at how these technologies serve this problem. It's an important one. I'll still go back to things that the individual governments can do. I go again to the literacy challenge. Human capital levels are really still low. And then a lot of the problem is also because these very small firms are largely in the informal sector. And so it's very hard to organize around how you reach them in a systematic way and support them. But access to finance is one of the challenges. And we're seeing younger people get into startups and try to really create something for themselves. So policies also to support startups and to help them navigate the space would help.
Christina, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, to, I think, all three of these questions, where investment is going and where economic activity is being triggered, I think is really important. And if you go on to invest.gov on the White House's website, there's a new tracker that we've put out of where all of the federal investment that the U.S. government is pouring into sectors across the country is going. And you'll see hundreds of little dots across every single state in the country to exactly the question that you raise of firm size. And we want diversity of entrants at the firm level to increase competition, but also to drive further innovation in all those critical sectors, but also to enhance economic activity in every area of our country. And you see that happening across Bill, CHIPS, and IRA, those three mega pieces of legislation. Driving really novel innovation in new areas of our country. So there are hubs popping up in Georgia, in Nevada, in Arizona, places you wouldn't necessarily think of as big drivers of the U.S.'s next innovation curve. You can see big investment hubs popping up in Ohio, upstate New York, North Carolina, Idaho. I could go on. But when you look at that map, I think it really gives you, to your question of broadband within Bill, there is an intentional focus on broadband in rural communities, but I would say that spread of entrance, but also the literal place-based spread of public investment that is triggering historic private sector investment is a very intentional, I think, approach to economic development that both we are learning from in real time, but that we also hope to continue with further investment.
Thank you. There was one hand there, so I think we have just, we can take two more questions. So that one hand was there already, maybe one there. Yes.
Hello, my name is Yaya Fanusi with the United States of Africa 2017 Project Task Force. I usually don't have a question. I usually make a suggestion to the panelists. And I have a suggestion for the Victoria of World Bank and the Professor of Entrepreneurship. I was at the AWS Summit 2 weeks ago, and at the Amazon booth. I came there, and there was something they were doing. And then the lady said, I said, what is? She said, this. And then she said to me, ask a question. And we asked the question, what are the benefits of a United States of Africa? And I said, the result that came out, I said, I'm going to send it to all the presidents of Africa to read it. So you do that in your World Bank, and then with your cousin, IMF, let them do that too, okay? And then you understand why you all are wasting your time talking all this nonsense about Africa global development.
Okay. One question, last question there.
So my name is Sophia. I'm from Mercatus Research Center. My question is, I think someone can ask who thinks is the best. I have just in mind, how can we protect like sound financial regulations in AI specific sector when we know it's emerging, there are a lot of innovation. It's also very difficult and we need to learn a lot day by day. And I heard about Sam Altman from OpenAI being interested in how we also protect consumers and actually American citizens to be lobbied by those huge industries who have a lot of money in order to protect their interest. And this is just my open question to everyone.
Yeah, thank you. So let me add one final question. We are running out of time to this, which came up in the from our online participants, which is should government take a more active role in influencing the direction of technological change? I mean, technological change is not exogenous. As Danny Roderick, who has a paper in our book, said that the discussion should not only be how labor should adjust to technology, but also about how technology should adjust to labor. Is there a role for a more active role for government in influencing the direction of technological change, including toward more labor-friendly technology and its innovations, the way it is deployed, ways that augment rather than displace labor and avoid what Simon, your co-author, Daron, calls excessive automation that destroys jobs without increasing productivity. So maybe 1 minute each in terms of responses, and then we will conclude.
Sure. I think to that question, we would say emphatically yes, that government can and should have a role in shaping economies. The government certainly shouldn't be in the role of picking winners and losers at the firm level, but at the sectoral level, you can see across Bill, CHIPS, and IRA, those 3 big pieces of legislation, clear direction in sectors that we think will drive economic growth, specifically inclusive economic growth. So you see big investments in the CHIPS and Science Act, particularly in the semiconductor industry, to manufacture semiconductors and then to create a really robust R&D ecosystem that will help the U.S. maintain and leapfrog in that specific technology because it undergirds so much of our economic growth. You see in the Inflation Reduction Act a huge focus on 38 plus sectors that will be critical to the clean energy transition, which we know when the president says he thinks about the clean energy transition, he thinks about jobs. And so centered in every one of those incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act are specific worker-centric elements of that policy. And then in the bipartisan infrastructure law, you see a huge focus on the underlying sort of roads, bridges, broadband that we know are critical to enhanced economic activity. And so we would say emphatically, yes, both there are sectors that are specific to economic growth that we are actively investing in, but also the shape of those investments can and should work for everyday communities and workers. And you also see that in the arc of those investments as well.
So yes, government should act in this space. I think Justina and her colleagues, the Biden administration, have done exactly the right things with a lot of bipartisan support. I emphasize that. And I hope they do more of it. And I hope that this scales up. And I hope that other governments that have sufficient capability around the world learn the lessons. It's not one size fits all, but I think there are lessons for industrialized countries and for emerging markets and maybe for some others. However, the question, I think, does raise two very important side points that we shouldn't let slip by. One is, what about consumers? I think there's a fantastic opportunity for someone to build AI tools that help consumers redress the balance vis-a-vis large companies, including the financial sector, where many people are taken advantage of because they don't really understand the products and they can't navigate their way around what's a moderately complex set of products. That's something that could be taken on. It's not trivial from a regulatory perspective to get it right, but it absolutely can be overcome. And that will be an amazing use of AI tools. Could be done by a big company, could be done by smaller companies. That opportunity is there to be touched right now in the US and around the world. However, there is another very important point with regard to finance, which is as these models become predominant, what you're going to see, presumably, is a lot of convergence in certain sectors towards almost all the remaining players will use very similar sorts of models. In finance, that's particularly dangerous because it'll exacerbate the boom-bust cycles that we get. And we've already seen plenty of copycat crises where lots of people pile into mortgage-backed securities or whatever else the fad of the moment was. This is a regulatory concern that I'm afraid is going to have to be watched very, very closely, and it's going to be hard. There's almost certainly going to play a role in the next serious crisis, whenever that comes.
Thank you. I would also say yes. I would say yes, but smart, because you also don't want to have government intervention and government action that really defeats the purpose of what you're trying to do, creates more distortions, keeps people away from the services and the benefits of technology. But clearly an active role at a minimum to ensure that it's more equalizing than unequalizing by taking care of what is needed for the most vulnerable groups is super important. And if you look at Africa, a lot of what is happening now is we're taking technology we're not doing a lot of technology development yet. So part of it is really how government policy ensures that these technologies can be rolled out with maximum benefit and impact for productivity, for growth, for people, and also an active role to promote research and development that would lead to some innovations coming from Africa and emerging countries as well. So, yeah, thank you.
So, David, you have the last word.
Yeah, so I agree with a lot of what was said. I think first on Justina's point, very much agree that government policies can help shape investment, particularly where there are either market failures or strategic reasons for investment in a sector that the private sector isn't otherwise addressing, and the Bipartisan CHIPS Act is a great example of that. Things like grand challenges are a really good example of that. What are big public health or other challenges that we're facing that you need to enlist private sector interest in addressing? The second thing I would say, and picking up on Simon's point, is on government services. And this is another way in which utilizing technology and AI to deliver government services better, to solve collective problems more effectively, whether that be around climate, whether it be delivering services during COVID and unemployment support or job training, right? And then I guess the third thing I would say is, and maybe this is a bit of caution, that question of, one part of the question was, can government policy kind of shape technology towards labor augmentation versus labor substitution? I think one real challenge there is, how do you know that in an ex-ante way at the technology level? I think that's a really, really hard problem. I think over time, we have seen that new technologies, if do much more than labor substitution if they're true general purpose technologies. They are creating all kinds of new occupations that we haven't thought about. The recent paper from David Autor, I think, found that like the majority of US jobs now are in occupations that didn't exist in 1940, right? So, we have computers that took away certain jobs of kinds of, certain kinds of accounting jobs or secretarial jobs, but they created, the software engineer class where there are millions of people working. So it's just very hard to know some of that in advance. So I think there is a role for government, but it's got to be very carefully done.
Well, thank you. We are out of time. I would like to, this has been a stimulating discussion, and I would like to thank our panelists for their insightful contributions. It's both an exciting and challenging time of change. So let's give our panelists a big round of applause. And I would also like to thank all the participants for joining us and sharing your comments and questions. We will post a recording of this event on the Brookings website, and it will also be available on YouTube. So thanks again. Thank you for all. Thank you very much.